goes. There we go. That's what I wanted to do. Okay, so I'm really excited to be here. I think we're going to have a kind of an intimate group today. I mean, what is it, like August or something? Like, are people on vacation? Is this what's going on? Apparently I didn't get that memo, but I am happy to be here because I'm talking about something that I felt has been really near and dear to my heart and kind of on top of mind right now. And I guess whenever it's on top of mind, it's on top of heart. And maybe you could just hop into the chat bar and just, I know I was just speaking to you, Lisa, but just let everybody let me know they can see and hear me. Even though I'm going to be chit-chatting away here, you can be going on the chat bar, letting me know what resonates with you. I want to give you an introduction to what's going to be going on for the next hour or so. And at the same time, you know me, I'm always doing a little bit of behind the scenes here. So I'm just getting myself organized so that I can do this as seamlessly as possible. So the topic tonight is being brave with uncomfortable or difficult conversations. And it comes on the heels of last month's talk, which is we talked about boundaries. And that was something that I really felt like a lot of women could really dig into because it felt really relevant. If, oh my goodness, if 2020 was anything, it is a course on boundaries, and it's also a course on self-love, and it's a huge course on clarity. So tonight, being brave with uncomfortable or difficult conversation really comes off of boundaries, because in being able to create really healthy boundaries, boundaries that enhance relationships, boundaries that enhance your relationship to self, it sometimes involves having conversations that maybe we aren't used to having, or conversations that we see as difficult, or putting ourselves in a place we haven't put before. So tonight will be a lot about, you know, talking about why it's important, talking about where it comes from, like our relationship to these kinds of things, giving you some, what I hope to be significant strategies and starting points. And then we're also going to do a really short journaling and breakout session whereby all of you are going to stay on the call. I always get a few people that jump off. We'll spend a few minutes journaling. The reason why I go back to that part, the reason this is a meeting and not a webinar, is because I know that a lot of this information is me speaking into the topic, but I know that you have a lot of the gold of what needs to be talked about. And I want this to feel specific to you. So sometimes what we're doing is we're thinking about it, we're thinking about it, we're thinking about it. But if we get the opportunity to actually action off of it, then it really, really helps. So I want to make sure that that piece is in there. So for those of you who don't know me, I think you all do. My name is Dr. Laura Foster. I go by Soul Inspired Girl for no other reason than I feel exceptionally soul inspired. I am a chiropractor of 24 years. I'm retired now just recently, as I think most of you know. I'm also a women's coach, and I've been hosting retreats. I'm a yoga practitioner for a number of years. Retreats are still around. I have a retreat that's coming up on Lake Muskoka in November, and I have 1 or 2 spots still available. So if you are the person who's looking for a small, intimate 10-person, 10-woman event in a really, really great place, reach out to me and I will let you know that information. Tonight, as we go into this, I'm also going to talk about an upcoming program that I have that really speaks to a lot of the things that we're talking about here tonight. And it's called Reclaim Your Voice. I know a lot of you probably know about it, but I'm gonna talk a little bit more about what it started as and what it's become and how it really is a continuation of some of the things that we're doing here tonight. So why is this topic important? Why is this ability to be able to have uncomfortable or difficult conversations, or maybe what I'm really trying to say is, why is it important for us to be able to speak up and say our truth and speak to difficult situations when we want to? And I think probably the first thing to say is because it comes up. You know, it's the essence of having intimate conversations, and having next level relationships involves having next level conversations, and real conversations create real relationships. And right now, always, but right now, people, you, me, women, everyone is craving real, authentic connection. And that means that we have to be able to lead with real, authentic conversations. And that involves us being able to speak our truth. And the other part of this is life is sticky. Life is tricky and life is sticky. And it's important to be able to rise to these occasions. And that means that sometimes we need to be able to have conversations that are something we'd like to avoid. I know that it's a practice, that it takes time, and it takes some kahunas, and it takes some ability and some strategy to be able to say the things that we want to say when we feel called to say them, okay? Also, when you just go through life and you're trying to avoid the uncomfortable conversation or something that you deem uncomfortable or difficult, it is a massive energy drain. Massive energy drain. It totally decreases your bandwidth when you are leaking energy all over the place. I always say when we stay awake at night, it's not for the conversations that we've had, it's for the conversations that we haven't had. It's for the decisions that we haven't made. So being able to be in your sense of your best self involves being able to manage your energy. And for a lot of us, when we're shrinking or we're editing or we're stepping back from the conversations that we're meant to be having, it means that we are leaking energy all over the place. And the way that that ends up happening is you deplete it from yourself more than anything. Also, staying away from uncomfortable conversations or avoiding the conversation that we need to be having also means that it damages relationships, right? You, first and foremost, don't have a very good relationship with ourselves when we're not able to speak to the things that matter to us. Number one, we're stepping away from our own back. We don't have our own back. We are not supporting ourselves, and it doesn't do anything for the relationships that we're in, right? Those relationships, the connections that we're looking for, the authenticity that we all want, involves being able to go there. Also, avoiding those kinds of conversation leads to burnout, leads to frustration, it leads to shutting down, and it leads to resentment. So being able to do this easier, being able to do it more often, being able to do it more authentically, and doing it with less backpedaling or shrinking is super, super important. The benefit of being able to have these kinds of conversations is it's many. Like when I sat down and I really thought to myself, when I was watching people go through Reclaim Your Voice, I did a beta program. I did it as a 5-day mini series, which in retrospect was maybe a bit much to do in 5 days. I've now extended it to 21. When we did it that way, what I noticed is that this information runs deep, and there are many, many, many positives to becoming better at speaking to your truth. Okay, so let me just go through some of my top ones. Number one is we learn how to back ourselves up, meaning we respect what we need. Okay, so when we don't speak to the conversations that we need to speak to, when we find ourselves not being able to speak our truth or speak up or speak out or in any way, shape, or form for the small things and for the big things, is we step away from our own support. So being able to do this means that we learn to back ourselves up. We respect what we need. Number two is, like I talked about, it builds healthy relationships. And this comes on the sort of the backbone of talking about how to set healthy boundaries. In order to set a healthy boundary, quite often we have to do this, don't we? We have to speak our truth. And sometimes that involves having what we perceive, because it's all about perception, is a difficult conversation. It builds healthy relationships, but it also makes room for vulnerability, right? And if you talk to, I wish I talked to Brene Brown. If you listen to Brene Brown, you read any of her things, she'll tell you the way to have the kind of relationships that we're all looking for is through vulnerability and being able to speak to our truth and being able to come up against what we perceive as difficult conversations allows us not only to be vulnerable, but allows us to grow. Number three, it reduces our energy leakage. And this is where I talked about when you are avoiding it, you are spending energy left, right, and center. So this is a way for you to shore up your energy reserves. This short-term discomfort that comes from being able to speak our truth or rising to these uncomfortable conversations leads to long-term ease. Okay, so it increases your bandwidth over time. So it's short-term discomfort, long-term ease. And it's really important to remember that, because when you're in that place of short-term discomfort, oh my goodness, it's hard to remember sometimes that getting over that hump is going to you know, one thing on top of the other is going to start to create more ease for you in the long term, because you don't have all these places where you're being disrespected, or you're disrespecting yourself, or you're avoiding the thing that needs to be said. Number 4, it also teaches us about ourselves. So the process of rising to have difficult conversations or uncomfortable conversations is that it enlightens you to yourself, right? It tells you and informs you about your own beliefs, and it gives you a chance to look at your belief system, decide if that belief system is working for you, and then giving you the opportunity to stick to it or upgrade to a new belief system. And more than anything, this process of really understanding this means that you really understand yourself, and it helps you tap into what you need, what you feel, and speak to that. So this is that thing where in order to have the relationship with the world that we all want to have, we first need to have the relationship with ourselves. It always, always, always starts with ourselves. Number 5, it tells us that we can advocate for our own needs. Okay, so being able to do this, being able to stand up, being able to speak your truth, tells ourselves that we care enough about ourselves to bother, right? So this is the part where I'm saying you have your own back. Because if you constantly shrink yourself, or you are editing, or you are waiting, or you're doing any of those things, hold on, I'm trying to add some people to the group, sorry. You probably, I know you can't see this, but every once in a while I have stuff that's going on in the background here. That's why I look like I'm distracted. But when we do that, that gives us the opportunity to know that we have our own back. And that's one of the most important things. We build trust and respect for ourselves, which the next time that a difficult conversation needs to be had, there's a precedent there. So in doing this practice of showing up and saying the things that we need to say, even when it's uncomfortable, it's like building blocks. Each time we do it, we learn to trust ourselves. We did it before, we can do it again. It gets us over the hump, and we start to create this strong inner trust and respect for ourselves, and it builds confidence in ourselves. If anything, you know that you can stand up for yourself when you need to stand up for yourself in whatever way you need to do it. So this is the part we're talking about where you have your own back. So why do we avoid having what we perceive to be difficult conversations? And the reason why I say, why do we, the thing about perceiving that we're having a difficult conversation is, and I'll get to this when we're talking about strategies, but a lot of times when I'm working one-on-one with clients, we talk about situations, we talk about boundaries, we talk about the conversation we're not having that we should be having, and we talk about what someone might fear, what they're concerned about, why they're avoiding it. And then when we strategize, and then quite often this person goes into the world and goes and has the conversation, what's really interesting is almost always they are completely shocked at how it really wasn't a big deal. So that's why I say, you know, why do we avoid what we perceive is going to be a difficult conversation? Now, don't get me wrong. I know that there are difficult conversations. I definitely know that. I've been in many, and I know some of you have difficult conversations that are ahead of you, things that you want to be saying. So I'm not minimizing that. I'm just saying that quite often we need to question ourselves, because we can have that ability to kind of look at it and think to ourselves, we are shirking away from something that we don't need to be. That's the big thing. So why do we avoid? Number one, and I think the biggest thing, and this is what we do a lot in day one in Reclaim Your Voice, is we look at our subconscious connection to the negative outcome. So in other words, what is our conversation, or what is our connection to being able to use our voice, to be able to enter into conversation that's uncomfortable, to say things that we're not used to saying? And we'll talk about that in a moment. Number two is, quite often we feel we need to defend ourselves. And my question would be, do we really need to defend ourselves? Number three is, we are concerned about making it worse. Meaning, maybe we need to be having a difficult conversation because the relationship is not good. It's not where we need it to be. And so we choose to stay silent instead of saying what we need to say, because we have a massive concern that we're going to make it worse. Or it's uncomfortable, right? Difficult conversations, uncomfortable conversations are not comfortable. And we're hardwired in our brain to want to have security. And so this is where this awareness, so when we have these conversations where we talk about this, what's great about this is we have the ability to kind of question ourselves, being insanely curious about what's going on. And when we do this, then quite often we realize that we are purposely avoiding it, and then we get to call ourselves on our own shit. So there's always two parts to it. I say you want to be your chief cheerleader. You want to be the person who like cuddles up next to yourself and you're like, you know what, Laura, you got this. Or of course you feel that way. This is difficult. You can do it. I know you can. I'm right here. That's the part that's like, go, Laura, go. But then there's this great to have this other part of you that knows her place. And that place is in calling you on your own shit. So when you know that you're not rising to the occasion, or you have something to take ownership of, that part of you can step up too. So it's the balance between knowing both. But the only way that you're going to get there is to increase your level of consciousness about this. So for some of us, we get in the face of an uncomfortable conversation or a difficult place where we want to speak our truth and we don't feel like we can, we edit, we back away, and we shrink, right? And so you know what I'm talking about from before is when we do this consistently, of course, what happens is we start to get angry, we start to become resentful, we get burned out, we start to shrink, all of these kinds of things. So the place where I want to start, if that's okay with you, is I want to go back to what I would consider to be the origins. The reason why origins is really important is because you want to know what, if any, subconscious beliefs you have around speaking your truth and having uncomfortable or difficult conversations. And the only way to do that is really to look back to your childhood. Because if I said, for me, you know, that I sometimes shirk away from having those conversations because of some of the things I saw in my childhood, I would never see that. Meaning, I think I spoke about this in the boundaries workshop, which is, I was never directly told that my opinion didn't matter. Not that I recall really. But what I do recall is that my dad, God bless him, used to turn to my mom on a somewhat regular basis and say to her, for goodness sakes, my mom's name, nobody gives a shit about that, or nobody cares about that. And I would just have this moment where I kind of like stared it up, and then I would see my mom shrink and I would see my dad rise. And not only did that make me incredibly sad, but it made me think to myself, does what I have to say matter? Because I don't want my dad responding to me that way. So one of the things that I want to do here before we get to, you know, the benefits and the strategies and all those kinds of things is to talk a little bit, and this is partly what I'm going to look at, is knowing what our subconscious or unconscious blocks or relationship things are to using your voice, speaking your truth, and going into difficult or uncomfortable conversations. So some of the questions I would ask you would be things like, did your mom or your dad or your parental figure in your life avoid real conversations? So you know me when I talk about this. There's the conversations that quite often we're all having. And then there's the conversations that we could be having. And that's what I call next level conversations. You know, when you're discussing something, or maybe even you're having a disagreement about something and you're going around, and it occurs to you that you're not actually having the real conversation, that you're discussing this, but really you want to be discussing this. And so I would ask you, you know, and this is something to just take a moment as we're going. This will be one of the questions I do in the journaling in a couple of minutes, but is, you know, what was mirrored and mentored to you about speaking your truth in childhood? Did your mom or dad or parental figure avoid real conversation? Did they brush it under the rug? Is that the way your family or your family unit, so to speak, dealt with things or didn't deal with things? And did your mom or your dad, quite often this for me was mirrored in my mom, like I just said, did she shrink, or did she edit her truth, or did she backpedal when she said stuff, really avoiding her from showing up fully in her truth? Okay, what was mirrored, mentored to you? What did you see growing up? What were the spoken and the unspoken expectations to you around using your voice, around safety, love, acceptance, all those kinds of things. When you spoke up, did you equate that with that being conflict? Is that what was mirrored to you? Because quite often, because my mom would shrink, edit, my dad said what he said, my mom became really small. And so it would build up and build up and build up. And every now and again, when she finally did speak up, it came out like a megaphone. And of course, it incited a bunch of conflict. So I started to equate speaking up with conflict, which it really isn't when you look at it. But if that's your experience, then you can see why you might be unconsciously or subconsciously avoiding speaking your truth. So, nice question to ask yourself to increase your own consciousness around this is, were you rewarded for using your voice a certain way or maybe not using it? For example, were you rewarded for being the nice girl? Were you rewarded for the girl who didn't make any waves in the family? Going with the flow? Was the spoken or unspoken expectation that you were seen, not heard? Okay, so maybe you were positively rewarded for being the nice girl. And what being the nice girl meant to you is that you didn't make any waves, you weren't outspoken, you went with the flow, you were seen, not heard. Do you see where I'm going with this? Number two is, or were you punished for using your voice? Were you considered to be outspoken? Was that something? Have you always, one of the things that I have a girlfriend, many of you have known, Dr. Heather, her and I talk about this because we're tall people, and I have a lot to say. I know you know that. But what I mean by that is that I kind of adopted this thing where I thought I was a lot, right? Maybe I heard that somewhere, someone said that to me, or maybe that was not necessarily a criticism, but I took it as a criticism. And so for a long time, my kind of unspoken story to myself was that I was a lot. And so I shrank back from saying my truth because I did not want to be here outspoken or too much. So my question to you is, did you have a negative or a positive relationship? Were you positively rewarded for not using your voice, for avoiding conflict, for avoiding difficult conversations? And were you negatively rewarded, so to speak, or punished for being outspoken or gregarious or having an opinion? Okay, so the way I like to ask that question too is, who did you need to be, whether it was spoken or unspoken, to be loved and accepted by the important people in your life when you were a kid? Okay, now, why am I asking this question, right? Why do I ask these questions? This, quite frankly, in Reclaim Your Voice, created a really lovely shitstorm of information. It really did. And I feel like this was probably one of the things that broke open the conversation more quickly than all the other things that we talked about. I don't think I realized, and it was in doing the prep for the course that I recognized how much my own childhood created how I, number one, learned or avoided speaking up for myself. And in turn, that then goes into, was I willing to show up and be brave with uncomfortable or difficult conversations? Because using my voice meant that I would sometimes unconsciously or subconsciously bump into these things that as a child, I, again, unconsciously and not on purpose by my parents, made me feel like I was either unworthy or unlovable. And that's it. Okay, so let me know, go in the chat room and let me know if this is landing with you. I have a couple questions that I'm gonna go ahead, let me just pull it up. Let me catch up to the information here. Oh, I know you had an amazing 2 weeks. I'm excited, Kathy. Yeah, making a big deal of a conversation in your head, and then when you actually have it, it's amazing, it's landing for you, great. Okay, so I'm gonna go into a few minutes of journaling, and in doing so, I'm gonna put up, just give you about, I think I'm gonna give you about 5 to 6 minutes. I have 3 questions. Now I know that these questions are things that you could spend a whole lot more time on, but I'm also aware that we're already half hour into this, and I wanna be able to give you time to work through a little bit of these, start the conversations. Then we're going to go into maybe a 5-minute share, just 2 or 3 people in a group privately, and then I'm going to get into some strategies and whatnot, okay? So these are the questions. So I hope you have a pen. Number 1 is, are you able to speak your truth? Are you able to speak your truth consistently? So, are you able to speak your truth consistently with ease, courage, and confidence? Okay, that's the first question. Are you able to speak your truth consistently? And when I say that, I really mean like when you feel called to, when you want to use your voice. Do you find that you can do that? And do you have a certain level of ease with that and confidence and courage and whatnot? And if not, what do you feel gets in the way of that? So can you use your voice with a level of confidence and courage? And if not, what gets in the way of that? Okay? You can let me know if I need to slow down. Number 2 is, what was mirrored or mentored to you? In other words, what did you learn about speaking your truth in childhood? Okay, so if you take kind of a walk back over what I just said, you know, what was your relationship to speaking your truth when you were a kid? Did you feel you could speak your truth? Could you use your voice? Could you speak up? Or was there a relationship to, you know, having or feeling like you had to be the good girl, the quiet girl, the girl that doesn't make any waves? Or were you oftentimes admonished, minimized, you know, kind of negatively associated with being too outspoken, you know, precocious, or gregarious, or those kinds of things? So what was mirrored and mentored to you about speaking your truth in childhood? Okay, one last one. How did your family handle emotions? How did your family or your family unit handle emotions? So I know for some people, when we start talking about these things, it starts to feel really, really heavy for them and for you. And I know that. I know that in order to get to lightness, sometimes we have to shine a light on our darkness. Not our dark places, like we did anything wrong, but the places that don't feel so great to go to all the time. But when we're talking about stepping into our most brilliant self, feeling the way that we want to feel, and having that sense of, you know, internal support, and tapping into who you are and being more of that on an ongoing basis, it really involves a level of understanding. So a certain level of curiosity about why we do what we do, questioning our beliefs, seeing if things are working for us or not working for us, and, you know, finding strategies and ways of showing up and shifting the narrative that goes on behind the scenes. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set my timer for about 5 minutes. And you can go ahead and work on those questions a little bit, okay? I'm going to go ahead and put everyone into groups. So there'll be 3 groups because there's only 10 or so of us on here. So what we're going to do in the group is, what will happen in a minute is it'll come up in the corner of your screen and you can just select it. And what you're going to do in the group for the next couple of minutes is you're going to give everybody about a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes each, to just go around and talk a little bit about your relationship to speaking your truth. So are you able to speak your truth? Are you able to use your voice the way you want to use your voice and speak to your truth and have those uncomfortable conversations? And if not, what do you believe stands in the way? Okay? All right, so I'm going to send everyone off. I'm going to open the rooms. Hold on. Back again. 1 second. Okay. Hello, Alicia. Okay, so I'm just going to wait for everyone else to come back in. Perfect. Hi, Laura. Okay, so before we start to get into the strategies of everything, I just would love a couple people to just share how that is for them. So, you know, whether you want to kind of sum up kind of what was the general feel in the group, or if you want to speak to any part of that. Would you like to go ahead and share? So what's it like? Are you able to use your voice consistently? You can just unmute yourself and start talking, or put your hand up, I'll unmute you. Who wants to go ahead and share? What gets in the way of you being able to speak your truth more often? Oh, you guys know that I'm going to stay here. I can way outstay. Oh, I knew it. Okay, Alicia.
My discovery was that I'm really good at speaking my truth with perfect strangers. Usually it comes out in anger, but still I'm able to do it. But with loved ones, I am the exact opposite with, because of the questions you posed, which was that like whatever we said as children in the household wasn't important. Or you really had to you had to be ready for like an hour-long debate, no matter what age you were, which then you just said, okay, well, then I'm not smart enough and I don't have enough evidence to back up what I'm saying, so then I'm out.
Yeah, that's an interesting run, right? Were you aware of that? Like really aware of that?
When I got to my 20s, yes, that's when that's probably why I kept putting myself back in university to study something else, just so I could be an expert in things, to like then feel like I could have the conversations that I now can have at 40.
Yeah, it's interesting because as I was just doing some background reading on this, the men who were writing articles about this kind of had one general feel to it. But it was interesting that when women were writing about, you know, being able to speak your truth and have uncomfortable conversation, there was a lot more information around feeling like you had to prove it. It's just like we already on a different level do so much of this in life that it just gets exhausting. So after a while, you just kind of wave the flag and you recede. And I was like, well, that's really interesting, because I get that, you know, especially right now, hey?
Yes.
Where, right? And it is difficult because the people, of course, that we want to be able to speak our truth with most consistently are the ones that are closest to us. And they often are the ones that are the most difficult to find our way to it, right? Because we care more about what they think and we feel maybe more vulnerable, those kinds of things.
Absolutely.
Thanks for sharing. One other share maybe? Oops, sorry. Anybody else want to share? Just give it a second and just let us know how it landed for you.
I'd like to say something, as I've been practicing a bit about sharing my truth. And what I was saying in our group is that it seems like it's easy to share until it's something like, you know, negative or uncomfortable. It's easy to share about, oh, I love this, or I thought this, or, you know, to have an opinion, until it's something that's like when I've been wronged or hurt, or seemingly wronged or hurt, and like a negative emotion or a hurtful emotion. And when trying to express that, it comes out so bitchy or like really nervous and tight. And so I'm like aware of that, and I'm trying to soften and play with kindness there. It just comes out like a cat, you know. And so I'm aware of that and working on that. I wondered if anyone else kind of felt like that around hurtful emotions anyways, painful emotions.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Did you want to say something, Lisa? Hold on, Lisa, I just have to unmute you. Go ahead.
I agree with you. Like, I have a really hard time voicing emotional things, because I guess for me, they feel like weakness. So when it's thoughts or intellectual ideas, debating that sort of thing, your opinions on things, that I don't really struggle with that at all. But when it comes to admitting things that are emotional or fears or weaknesses, that stuff feels like weakness. And so I find it very difficult to share that. And so a lot of times I think people don't realize how sensitive or vulnerable I am because I don't allow that part to be seen. And that's something I really struggle with, is even really knowing what I feel.
Yeah.
What I find interesting about that I've learned from Laura is that when you're talking about facts with people and you're having a conversation, it's easy for them to dispute it because they're facts. Like, you know, whereas if you're talking about somebody's feelings, how you feel about something, they can't really say, well, that's not true or that's not right, because it's your feeling. And I learned that a few weeks ago, and that has been very powerful for me, because I think, well, you can't really tell me that that's not right because you don't know how I feel, and you don't, you know, it's not a right or wrong thing. It's just I feel, or it's, I'm not explaining that very well. Laura can do that better, but I think you kind of get the gist of what I mean.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
I was gonna say, I totally get what you're saying. Well, I hope so, because if you're trying to say I said it, two things. I'm just gonna, if you can mute yourself if you're just for a second. So Kathy, to speak to what you're speaking about, one of the strategies that I have around this is to focus on what you're feeling. And I'll speak to that in a minute too, Lisa. But to, you know, when you're sharing something or you're attempting to have a conversation that is close to your truth, or as close to your truth as you can, instead of coming at it from it is, meaning like, especially if you're speaking about a relationship thing, you're in relationship to somebody and you're saying, this is how this, you know, this is what this does. And when you do this, this is what's happening, and so on, you know, kind of like saying it is, like it's a factual thing, that allows the person to turn around and go, no, that's not it. Whereas if you speak from a place of, I feel this when that happens. I feel this when this happens. Or the person really has a lot harder time being able to say to you, well, that's wrong. It's like, well, right or wrong, it's how I feel. It becomes indisputable. I do agree, Lisa, that this is the essence of what we're talking about. You know, this is really why I want to have these conversations. And that's why I called it being brave with uncomfortable or difficult conversations. I agree with you, the people closest to us, the ones that were, you know, Alicia, you're talking about. And when we expose our feelings, it's because we probably unconsciously have, I know I do, some negative relationship to being a feeler. You know, I don't know that it was overly celebrated. You know, wow, big feels, Laura, good for you. It was kind of like, in my family, it was, stay inside the rubber band. Like, don't pull it too far this way and don't pull it too far that way. Don't be too sad. Don't be too happy. Like, it was kind of mirrored to me because I was in a very patriarchal family and my dad kind of ruled the roost, as you can tell by my whole level of conversation around all this. And so for me, I was learning to model him, and he wasn't overly in touch with his emotions and nobody was celebrating them. And so that's my story. That definitely might not be your story, but the point is, I do understand why I, in particular, have that kind of like learning to go there. I connected a lot with Brene Brown's work because when she spoke about vulnerability, and vulnerability being the way that we connect with other people, I could feel that. I knew that's where all the juicy stuff is. And if we want to get to the point where we're having those connections with the people closest in our lives, we do have to be able to level up to this. So that's where I feel like the practice is. So it's like saying, it's fucking hard, right? Like, and that's okay. And that's the part where, you know, you kind of like, you put your arm around yourself and you're like, this is hard. Like, no doubt about it. It's difficult saying what you want to say straight from the heart, and it's a practice. And I think that's where you kind of put the inner critic aside, and the cheat, you know, the person who's like, buck up, girl, you put her to bed, and you start, you know, hanging with the one who's saying like, yeah, you can do this. I know you can. and understanding why it is that we shy away from it. So not just acknowledging that we shy away from it and going, but being curious, like why, where's that come from? And, you know, why do I feel that way? And, you know, where, you know, what's the origins of that? And again, there is value in that, because then we start to have an understanding of where it came from. And we can start to dismantle the unconscious belief systems that we have associated with that to start to reframe it. So, you know, in Reclaim Your Voice, that's a big part of it, is kind of to reclaim, but also to refocus the way that we look at these things that we stumble over, the difficulty that we're having. So my number one thing in strategy, and thank you so much for sharing that, Lisa and Laura and Kathy and Alicia, is that number one, I think it's a giant lesson in knowing yourself, which, you know, you would think is so easy, but it's really not. But it's really having an understanding of how do I approach a difficult conversation, right? Like just having this insane curiosity about yourself. And what is my history around uncomfortable situations? Have I been negatively conditioned in uncomfortable situations? Do I ever go there? Have I gone there in the past and I was shut down? So just understanding that. And do you believe that your job is to make everything okay? So the minute that I started to realize that I'm not responsible for the other person's reaction to how I'm feeling, I could just put that down, literally put that down and not feel responsible for that. That meant that I was not like I wasn't sensitive or compassionate to them, but I knew that in order for me to speak my truth in any way, shape, or form, I had to now not be responsible for that person's emotional response to my truth. Okay? The other thing is, we manage other people's emotions all the time. We do that, and we don't need to do that, right? So it's like we're willing to cut ourselves short to make sure the other person is comfortable. We're willing to make ourselves uncomfortable to make sure they're not uncomfortable. And if that's the case, where we just feel uncomfortable, then that's when we start to push back from it, right? So being really clear on the fact that it's not our job to make other people be okay with it. And number two, not feeling like we need to manage their emotions. But asking yourself the question right off the bat, like just asking yourself, do I do that? Why do I do that? Where does that come from? And just being interested in that. So just be aware of your tendency around that. Number two is know why it's important. Every single time we meet in this group, and all my coaching clients will know, I am really, really big on understanding your why. And the reason why it's important to know with crystal clarity, the reason why you want to be more brave with difficult or uncomfortable conversations and speaking your truth, the reason why you want to know that is because it's going to be uncomfortable. There are going to be times and places when you don't want to do it. It's kind of like when you commit to like an exercise program and the alarm goes off at 5 a.m. If you don't know your why, you're like, well, I don't want to get up right now. So you just don't do it. So when you're in that time of short-term discomfort to build the long-term ease, it means that you come up into these situations where you need to have the uncomfortable conversation. So you need to be crystal clear on why you're working on this. Why is it important to you? Why do you want this? You know, and one way that you can do that is to look in your current situation. If you feel like this is something that's preventing you from growing and having the kind of relationships in life that you want, ask yourself, if I continue doing what I'm doing, engaging in what I'm engaging in exactly the same way, what's that going to feel like and look like for me in 5 months? And if I do that for the next 5 years, what's that going to look like and feel like for me in 5 years? Okay. Conversely, if I was to be able to shift this, if I could show up more consistently, to be able to speak my truth with more clarity and courage, less backpedaling, if I could do that and I could engage in these conversations that I perceive right now are uncomfortable, what would that look and feel like for me in 5 months? And what would that look and feel like that for me in 5 years? How would my life be different? How would my relationship with myself be different? How would my relationship to the people around me be different? What would my self-confidence look like? What would my inner self-esteem look like? My self-image? How would I show up differently? The reason you ask yourself the questions is because then you start to be intimately connected to why it's so important for you. Because if you're not motivated at the very least, and you don't have anchors to that, when it's uncomfortable, when it's sticky, when it doesn't feel good, you'll be like, another day. And you'll find yourself kind of pushing yourself back from that, okay? Strategy number 3, be the person who initiates it. So if you're in a situation, so let's just say it's an in the moment where you know you need to address something and you know that maybe you don't want to, or one of your patterns is kind of to push back from it. The thing is, if you need to come back to a conversation, so a lot of times when we're in long-term relationships with people, the groove has been going for a long time, right? The patterning has been going on for a long time. And the way maybe you and this other person operate is very set. And so for you to go back and disrupt that and shift it and change it and now be willing and able to have the uncomfortable conversation, this is more difficult. Because the number one thing I would say is when you're in a situation where you know you need to speak up, do it sooner rather than later, right? You don't want to procrastinate. We stay up at night, like I said, worrying about the things that we haven't done, not the things that we have done. And so if you are in that moment where you know a conversation needs to be had, do your best to kind of shorten the time frame between when it happens and when you speak to it. Because that time in between is called stress, energy, loss of bandwidth. That's what creates the stress. So, but if you have a conversation that you need to go back to, be the person who initiates it. Okay? So if you know it's the elephant in the room, you're not having the conversation, it's easier if you're the person who initiates it because it'll be easier for you to navigate. You see what I'm saying? Okay? The number 4 thing is pre-plan. So practice putting your words to how you're feeling, right? And that's why you kind of want to pre-plan it. If you know there's a discussion that you need to be having, is pre-plan it. Sit down with pen and paper and write out why it's important to you. Even write out a few things of how you could say it or what you want to say. And we'll talk a little bit about some great ways to do that, but be willing to pre-plan. So yeah, it's no big deal if in the moment you have it and you have the conversation and maybe, you know, it blows up and it doesn't go the way you want it. That happens. We've all been there. But just being willing to let it go in that moment and circle back and have the conversation. And in that space between when it happens and when you come back, that's when you kind of discipline yourself a little bit to kind of pre-plan or practice it a bit. And that's the part as well that we're talking about where, you know, in the moment, you don't want to procrastinate, right? If it just happens and you know right there, because you know the feeling, you're like, I need to say something to that. Do your best to just speak it in the moment so that it's not hanging out there, okay? And when you do speak to it, you want to be clear and you want to be direct and you want to keep the conversation on topic. So I know that's not always easy when we're emotional about things, but we tend to have higher emotions when we've let things go, right? So at first, you might be speaking to things that are highly charged. So you want to do your best to be in a situation where you are less charged about it. And oftentimes that comes from sorting through our own feelings, right? Like maybe you're talking to a girlfriend or you're sitting down with yourself and you're speaking to it and you can kind of like, it's like a pressure cooker. You're like letting off steam so that when you finally get to the conversation that you want to have, you can be a little bit more articulate, a little bit more clear, and a little bit more direct. So again, Brene, being clear is kind, being unclear is unkind. If you're showing up to the conversation and you're clearly editing yourself and you're starting off with a wish-washy version of it, then that's what the person is going to receive. So just reminding yourself, and this is all a practice, it's not about being perfect, to be as clear as you can, be as direct as you can, and stay on topic, okay? And don't, again, I'm going to say this a few times, clear yourself with the responsibility of being responsible for their emotions. It is, I grew up with a lot of volatility, so there is that part of me that finds it uncomfortable when things become volatile. And it took me a long time to realize that that was just my own thing. I just needed to own that. And that was a belief that if it was volatile, then I might be unsafe. And it's not true. And so now on the other side of 50, working on this, I know that this can be a trap for me, but because I've been working on it, I'm a bit conscious of it. So it means that I can sort of step away from that. And that's where I think that this all kind of comes together with time. Number one is define success for yourself. So for me in a conversation where I am doing my best to speak my truth, success isn't necessarily that the person agrees with me. Right? Do you hear what I'm saying? I don't necessarily need the person to agree with me. That'd be lovely. That'd be just great if, you know, every time I went to have an uncomfortable conversation, the person I'm speaking to just turned to me and said, "Oh my gosh, Laura, you're so right. I couldn't have said it better myself." You know, that doesn't really happen, does it? So instead, I just sort of take that off of me, and I define success is me. I can only control me in a conversation. That's all I can do. So I'm responsible for me. I'm not responsible for the other person. So success for me is me being able to speak my truth. End of story. Okay, so you get to define success for yourself. What is success for you? Because if success means that the person is always going to agree with you, that's challenging, right? That's super challenging. It's also not about winning or losing. And this is where I'm getting back to the part where we're talking about what is success. It's about being heard. I also can't be responsible for someone hearing me. Okay, so remember last month, a lot of you were on the call about boundaries. It's like a boundary is where you end and the next person starts, right? So this is what this is when we're talking about difficult conversations is, you're here, they're there. You're not like this. I know we feel like that sometimes, but we're like this. So your responsibility ends here. Their responsibility ends here. So success is, I said what I needed to say in the best way that I could, the most compassionate, direct, open. I didn't feel responsible for their emotions. They may or may not have agreed with me. What they think of me is none of my business. And it's not about winning or losing. Okay? Now, why do I say that? Is because it is a real tendency, and I'm speaking from my own truth as well, to want to enter into some conversations, especially ones that are with people close to us. And that's why sometimes it's easier having these conversations with other people is because we feel like we need to win the conversation. And that was modeled to me. I don't know if it was modeled to you. So just, it's great, like I said, when someone agrees with you, but not feeling that. The win for me and the win for you, especially when you're starting this, is being willing to have the uncomfortable conversation, being responsible for your part in it, showing up in the way that you can best articulate what you're feeling, okay? Number 11, yeah, we're on number 11. Avoid anticipating derailment. So this is the anticipation, and I think Kathy, you spoke to this in your comment at one point, was anticipating that it's going to go somewhere, right? Maybe it's gone there before, and so we have in our head, we're imagining that it's going to go, I know how this is going to end. We say that to ourselves sometimes. I know where this is going. I'm going to say this, they're going to say that, we're going to end up here. So that's part of us where we don't overly want to do that. You're right, it might end up there, I don't know. But the more energy you put into that, the more it's going in that direction. So you want to, on some level, stay positive, and you want to listen mindfully. And I know this sounds funny. It sounds like I'm not meaning like I'm talking to like kindergarten kids, but you want to be compassionate and you want to enter it with more curiosity. Because we feel charged quite often when we go into uncomfortable or difficult conversations, it's hard for us to listen. It's also hard for someone else to listen. So this, if we're really mindful of staying positive and open and on some level having some curiosity around it, then we can get further with the conversation. And more than anything, trying to find a space within yourself where you are more comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? I know we all say, you know, growth happens on the edge of our comfort zone. I mean, I actually really hate that saying, but the truth is that, you know, It is uncomfortable when we're in places that we haven't been before or haven't spent a lot of time or we've had a negative association with in the past. And so know that it isn't going to feel fantastic. And when your brain says, retreat, move back, that's enough, you have the capacity in your cognitive ability to say, there it is, I know it's uncomfortable, but I am practicing being uncomfortable in this situation. So number 13 is being open to being surprised of the outcome. And that's the thing that I get with a lot of women that I work with, is it's like, wow, you know, I got myself all seated up for that. I prepped, I spoke about it. I kind of, you know, took control of the things that I wanted to say, and I went into it, and it actually went better than I expected. So, you know, there are real actionable, empowering strategies that we can use around this, especially when it's a skill more than anything. Number 14 is to speak to your feelings. I said this already. So instead of the it is this way or it is that way or you are this way or you are that way, it is I feel this way, I feel that way, I feel this way when this happens, those kinds of things, okay? Deconstruct the outcome. So this is something I used to use a lot in my sugar detox, which is when you've had an uncomfortable conversation or you've showed up in a way that you've been working on showing up more consistently, speaking your truth in more situations with more clarity and more ease, having sort of the wherewithal or the emotional capacity to go back and deconstruct what happened. And all I mean by that is just to simply, even if when you lie your head down at night, and you can say to yourself, you know, you knew you showed up for the conversation, we've had the discussion. So whether it was in the moment or something you went back to, ask yourself, you know, how did that go? You know, did I feel the way I wanted to feel? Did it end up the way? Could I have done it better? You know, those kinds of things. Just asking yourself, if it went really well, ask yourself, why did that go so well? The reason that we deconstruct it, even when something went really well, is so that we can tap into our responses to our emotions. And it starts to teach us what works for us. So instead of assuming that you got what you needed to get from the situation, redefine it by being willing to have the conversation. So asking yourself, how did it go? If it went well, why did it go well? What did you love about it? You know, how were you surprised? What was the unexpected outcome? Flip side, if it doesn't, go ahead and ask yourself those questions as well. Two quotes that I love. One is from Cheryl Richardson, and it says, if you avoid conflict to keep the peace, you start the war inside. If you avoid conflict to keep the peace, you start the war inside. And I love that one. Because this is part of the reason why a few months ago I ended up retiring from full-time practice. And it wasn't because I didn't love chiropractic. For those of you who know me in practice, I love practice. I was moving on to a new phase, but the reason that I actually retired my license was because I was feeling a lot of inner conflict. There were things that had never been there before that were now there for reasons I don't know. Truths that I wanted to say in a way that I wanted to say it. And I apparently had been quite okay not saying it for a long time until it wasn't okay. And this inner conflict within me was building and building and building. I don't know why. All of a sudden, well, I could call it COVID and all those things, but the truth is I don't really know why. And so, you know, what creates conflict now could be different than what created conflict 5 years ago for you. What was okay for you last week might not be okay for you now. So what we're all trying to do is get to that place where we can speak to that, right? That place within us that we can honor what we need to speak to when we need to speak to it in the way that we want to, right? All right, home stretch, everybody. I know that it's not weekend, but it's holiday time. Okay, so a couple last points. I want to talk about the ultimate benefit. You know, so I know that when we are more brave with being willing to have uncomfortable conversations, amazing things happen. We have a better sense of ourselves. We build better connections to other people. We know that we honor ourselves. I will tell you the three things that I think are ultimately the reason that we do this work. Number one is you build a better bond with yourself. You're the person you need to be in relationship with for the rest of your life. Everybody else can come and go. It's you. So to build that relationship with ourselves means that we are willing to be vulnerable with ourselves. So when I talk about speaking your truth, I'm usually not talking about being able to go on social media or stand up behind a microphone and so on. It starts with just speaking our truth to ourselves. And that actually can be one of the most vulnerable things, because when we say it, we can't unhear what we've heard. All the good stuff comes from the other side of that. When you know you've got your own back, you'll always be okay. So number one, the ultimate benefit is you build a better bond with yourself and others, but they're secondary. Number two, it trains you to have next level conversation. The next level conversations are the conversation that we should be always having, which is the real conversation, right? So we know that our world is very much built on having, I don't know what kind of conversations. I'm not saying that's those are the kind of conversations you have. I'm just saying it's kind of the thing in the world right now. And the conversations we all crave are the real conversations, or the ones that I call next level conversations, the conversations we could be having. So not all those conversations are super comfortable, but all of them are super rewarding. So the ultimate benefit of being more brave with this is it trains you to have that, which means that the world gets to see who you are, who you truly are. And when you do that, then the people and the situations and the relationships come to you because you're leading with who you are. That's the difference. And reiterating a bit. Number three is it helps you know yourself. This is the part where you get really intimately connected with your beliefs. And you can understand what's working for you and what's not working for you. My biggest thing around all this is it builds a path back to yourself. And we all need that once in a while. It doesn't matter how confident and secure and, it doesn't matter what side of the microphone you're on or who's speaking. Everybody deals with this all the time. And it comes around. It's like a rotating thing, right? You never really get past it. So it's a matter, that to me is where the practice is. It builds a path back to you. So you always have your own back. Your inner confidence, your self-esteem, your self-trust. It creates an incredibly strong, resilient, inner badass foundation. That's it. Okay. All right. So that's the main content for tonight. The truth is that there is no one easy way to get to the other side of it. It really, really, really is a practice. I have my 21-day program starting on August 10th, which is next Monday. It's called Reclaim Your Voice. I'm sure you know that if you follow me. And it really is the ability, the practice, the digging in much deeper to know yourself and have the strategies to be able to say the things you want to say to yourself and to others with more confidence, more courage, more conviction, less editing, less shrinking, less backpedaling. So it's having the understanding and then being able to have the strategy that works for you and in practice. So what was once a 5-day mini series is now 6 live workshops, 1-hour workshops. Actually, they're about 40 minutes actually. 2 a week for 3 weeks. You don't need to be live. They are all taped. You get them sent to me immediately after. They also have a downloadable PDF exercise that allows you to take the time to make it specific to you. Okay, so that's where it goes from me blabbing to you solidifying. They're webinars, they're not meetings. So 5 out of the 6 of them are webinars. So you can listen to me. You don't have to watch me. You can listen to them while you're walking the dog, at the gym, whatever it is that you want to be doing. And then you sit down and you take about 10 minutes to do the exercise. The value, quite honestly, is in the Facebook group. The Facebook group is the opportunity for you to, and several of you in here have been in the group already, to be able to chat, meet, connect, talk about it. I show up there a lot. The difference for this one is in 21 days, I can be there a lot. When it's a 5-day mini series, between me doing it and setting up, there isn't a lot of time in between. That's why I've reformatted it. So if this is something that you feel innately connected to, and I know I do, it's probably the most important work I've done in a very long time. The program is on soulinspiredgirl.com/reclaim your voice. It's $147. If you've done the program before, there's an alumni rate, and we start on Monday. I start on Monday. You might not start on Monday because you can listen to it whenever you want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and, unless you have any questions, I'm going to go ahead and close down the webinar and the meeting tonight. I'm going to hop on over to our Facebook group, Soul Inspired Girl. And if you have any questions or anything like that, you can go on there. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for, you're welcome, and taking what day is it? Wednesday night of the week after the long weekend. Honestly, big kudos to that. I truly appreciate it. So I hope that was helpful. Please connect with me. You're very welcome, Kathy. Let me know how it all landed for you. And I just want to tell you how much gratitude I have for all of you. And I hope to see you in Reclaim on Monday. Okay? Thanks, everybody.